From Einmal Eins Productions, this is Singletrack, episode 302. I'm your host, Matthias Eichler, and this show is brought to you by Electric Cable Car, your daily source of mountain news, updates on the culture and business of trail running. Here's what's happening over at Electric Cable Car. It's been a couple of big weeks in the UTMB world. Hoka is new title sponsor of the World Series. Kodiak will be American major in 2025, and new majors coming to Down Under, and of course lots and lots of events are happening all over the world. Oh, and Jim Walmsley is going to be back in Chamonix. All this I try to cover, distill, and comment on at electriccablecar.com. Check it out, stay up to date, and sign up for the newsletter to never miss a story. With Trail Running Film Festival, we also just announced our online watch party and fundraiser for 2024. Tickets are on sale now at trailfilmfest.com/watch. Come join us from May 30th to June 11th. All right, good friend Nick Triolo just made a big professional move and is one of our trail running's most important voices, and one without a podcast or Substack. I wanted to hear from him personally what inspired him to take the leap into independent work and away from the security of the full-time job at Outside as senior editor. I'm rooting for Nick. Can't wait to read his book and follow along at what comes next. Let's get to it. Nick Triolo back on Singletrack. I'm so excited about this conversation. Welcome back.
Thanks, man. It's really nice to be here. Our previous conversation was such a joy to have. I think it might have been an hour plus, but it could have easily been like 6 hours, just for your audience to know that.
I've been worried about the same thing in sort of mental preparation. I'm not somebody who like writes a whole bunch of notes down in preparation, but mental preparation, I'm like, I think this could go really, really long. I apologize to all of us collectively or on behalf of that. So it's so great to have you. And just as you were connecting it back to our previous conversation, there was something special there, and we need to continue this conversation, but we also sort of break it up and take a moment to say, big news on your end. You made a big move. We need to talk about the big practical things before we dive into the metaphysical things.
Yeah. Thanks. I just really appreciate your sensitivity around my story. And I just really want to just give you a high five for the space that you provide here for not just me, but for all your guests. So I just after 2+ years as an editor at Outside, and first with Trail Runner magazine, and then sort of moved into Outside Online and Outside Run most recently. After a 2+ year stint there, tenure, I decided to move on last week. Was sort of 2 weeks ago, actually, was my last day, and had a really good run. Felt really satisfied with the work that I had done there. Still feel pretty confident in the platform and its positioning in the larger kind of run media ecosystem, of which is obviously constantly changing. The sort of the tectonic plates that mediascape surfs on is constantly shifting, and I think it was an honor to be hired, to have the confidence by Zoe Rome, who hired me, to take on sort of the editorial vision of the magazine in its last sort of breaths as a print magazine, and its sort of evolution and shift into the fully digital realm. And I think that, without getting too much into the weeds, I think the decision to leave was less a function of not having much confidence in the team or the outside media ecosystem. I think there's a lot of incredibly intelligent and smart thinkers and writers and editors there that I learned a ton from. I think it actually has more to do with some of the internal gravitational forces in my body and my psyche, and some of the curiosities that have shifted and have evolved into some other areas of inquiry. And that's fun to track. It's a little mysterious to me. I think there's still residue from so much of what brought me originally to the running media landscape, in terms of tracking, exploring, being curious about, and being sort of obsessed with how humans move through landscapes, how humans interface with the more than human landscape. In what ways might running be a way to a primary form or practice, a body practice of being in rich dialogue with place? These are like the main questions that I think uh, brought me to a position of an editorial position and a creative position at Outside. And it's also what's bringing me into the next phase in my career and my creative output. So there's just so much that there's a central thread there that I'm still sort of really inspired by and courting. And I think it centers around how does our organism as our human organism sort of remain in close proximity to the ground underfoot, and that can be obviously expressed and celebrated and discovered and found, in rich dialogue through running. And it can
Yeah.
also be found through so many other outlets. And so I think that as I move into this new mysterious chapter in my professional and creative life, I think it's still going to be rich in those questions about how as humans do we interface with a planet that is also alive, that is also moving, and how do we find a rich kind of intimate relationship with a planet, our bioregion, and a planet. And a, last thing I'll say is, in a planet that's totally shifting and changing and in peril, that's warming, that is in sort of increasing precarity and increasing speeds of collapse. So I think part of me also was wondering if I might be able to be in more intimate and direct contact with that conversation, that dialogue, and any artistic output that I can be a part of that maybe Outside or the Trail Runner wasn't able to fully contain or hold or uh, offer that for me. And so yeah, that's where I am currently.
I mean, it's a big place, and I think you described this really well. And I want to sort of say this up front. This is not here meant to be sort of a let's burn the bridges on the way out the door. We're not here to bash Outside and say what is all bad about sort of this traditional way, or just this modern way, I suppose, of making media. I really want to have a conversation around the space that you are in and what drives you to this move, because you're moving into a space that's not really clearly defined yet. You're not just saying, hey, I'm here to announce my new role as XYZ. And I think that's an exciting place to be in. But you said many things that I wanted to bring up. And one of them, and we should talk and anchor this around before we sort of move into this new phase. Um, in preparation to this, I listened to your shorts on the Dirtbag Diaries, and it was absolutely amazing. I listened to it on a run, and I'm not somebody who spends, I love the Dirtbag Diaries, but I'm not spending a lot of time listening to these type of stories. I'm too practical in many ways. I'm too trying to be efficient. I'm listening to like who's going to be the next CEO of this place and stuff, right? And it drives me crazy that I'm not really spending much time with it. And so it was really great. And I think we should talk about this, because this is, I think, our first podcast was connecting to the heart place. This was your heart place. This was the place where you truly connected. We should talk about the podcast and the story in this event for a moment before we dive into anything forward. I hope it's not too far in the past for you, and you can reconnect to this time when you ran across the place that you ran across. I don't even know all the words down there.
Yeah, that was exactly 10 years ago. Actually 10 years ago, or actually 11 years ago now. It was 20 April 6th of 2013 when we did this run. And so yeah, I mean, thanks for listening to that. I actually need to re-listen to that. And the Dirtbag Diaries are there's such cool folks over there. And also just to connect back to what you said about so trail runner and outside, I think, they actually really supported and were moved by the campaign that we put together in Baja, which I'll talk about in a second. So again, I just want to return back to the fact that trail runner and outside have like done nothing but offered me so many avenues for creative expression, for deepening my editorial skills, and that's a function of some seriously badass people that work
Mm.
there. And so I just want to reinforce what you said, that this is not some sort of critique on their media expression, but more of actually a celebration of the platform they afforded me. That said, yeah, so it was, I mean, man, this was like, without spending the next 5 hours talking about it, this was a really big turning point in my life. In 2012, I moved from Portland, Oregon, after a short but sort of like punctuated career in competitive ultra running. Had just run Western States and moved to Baja to basically like house sit on the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula in a small town called Todos Santos. And I've been going down there for the better half of the past decade. And I'd go down there, with family, and we'd surf, we'd be by the ocean because that's what you do when you're in Baja. But I'd find myself increasingly sort of like looking away from the ocean and looking east towards the mountains that were sort of this spine that offered this spine to the southern peninsula. These mountains that kind of shot up from the desert floor about 7,000 vertical feet, the sort of wall of granite. And I always just kind of wonder, like, what the hell's up there? It seems just like this beautiful mountain range. Um, and increasingly, I learned that it was called the Sierra Laguna. It was a UNESCO biosphere area, really bioregion, just kind of incredible area rife with wildlife and endemic species, and pine trees at the top, and a huge source of water for the a watershed for the area. Anyway, I keep on going back every year and just kind of wonder, like, increasingly, what's going on up in those mountains. And as my ultra running career sort of developed and deepened, I started taking trips up into the mountains and running the peaks, and getting up into the top into these kind of amazing sort of high alpine, not high alpine, but these like pine oak meadows, sort of these big kind of dried lake beds at the top. And then, and as I did that, I also sort of started cultivating an environmental ethic, and was learning about these mines that a multinational mining corporation were seeking to gain permits to mine gold in the mountains there, and just kind of learned about that as I was sort of getting immersed in the space every year. And then this kind of 2012 came, where I moved there for 5 months, and joined a larger campaign, kind of a multi-year campaign to stop these permits from being granted to this company. And it sort of crescendoed into me pitching an idea of running, kind of attempting to run a 70-mile crossing of the Baja Peninsula from the Sea of Cortez on the east up and over the highest point, the Picacho, in the Sierra, all the way to Todos Santos on the west, and basically like dipping your toes in the Sea of Cortez in the east in the morning, running for X amount of hours with as many people as wanted to join, and then jumping in the Pacific Ocean at night. And that's what we did. So we met in April of 2013 after kind of getting a bunch of permits from mayors and getting granted the access to traveling through some of these towns and villages to basically get to the foot of the mountains on the east side, up what's called Canyon de Inicio. I stayed with a bunch of ranch families overnight and kind of gained their trust, and had these like incredible conversations about the lore and the myth and the ecology of these camps, these ranchos, and was joined by, I think, over 50 runners on the day of the run. Only a few of which actually wanted to do the whole thing, but had a ton of people, runners, walkers, and cyclists, kind of join us for sections. But then there was two other men that actually ran the whole 70 miles with me, and it turned out to be like an epic, like 18-hour run. That was not a race. It was no race. There's no fastest known whatever. It was just basically to connect the Sea of Cortez with the Pacific Ocean in a sort of a solidarity effort to get people immersed in the landscape that was sort of at stake here, and take as many videos and photos as we could along the way. And then that sort of evolved into a short film that we made called The Crossing, that I think is online. I think we have to, there's something wrong with the link right now, but it's available online. And then it also, I connected with the Dirtbag Diaries folks at Patagonia around the time that we were making the film and did the short. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, that's a long-winded way of saying it was a catalytic experience for me as someone who was wanting to connect foot travel and running with protecting and celebrating wild space. And it just so happened that those two threads intersected really palpably in Baja during this time of transition in my life, personally, professionally, and creatively. And it really put me on a new trajectory of thinking about where those two worlds can sort of overlap. And it's sort of set me on this journey that I'm still sort of courting right now.
Do you feel like this experience was an accumulation of things that you always wanted to do? You said you had run Western States before, so you weren't this competitive ultra running time. Was it something new that broke open something you hadn't really seen possible before? Or do you feel like you've always been on this trajectory and this was sort of the accumulation of everything that has always been you?
I think I've been thinking a lot about this, Matthias, and I think um, there's a deep hunger for like there's a competitive animal in me that really wants and loves to improve, to know the essence of like, and I think that when I first learned about ultra running, long distance running in 2007, when I moved to Portland, um, I got really obsessed with it. I got really enmeshed in the whole, just the mechanics of it, to the point where I wanted to like take it to its like deepest inevitable sort of like the furthest place I could, and that was pretty much Western States. That
Mhm.
like within 3 years, I was like towing the line at Western States, and but also,
You got into the lottery within 3 years.
I
Congratulations.
mean, that was back in Nam, that was back in the 1850s. But like, you know, I did like steal a golden ticket. I got a golden ticket at Waldo, um,
Okay, nice.
which helped.
Yeah.
And I got only because I got third place because the first two guys, I think Ian Sharman and Dave Mackey, were well ahead of me and way more proficient at running, but also they had already had tickets and like they're already
Mhm.
automatically in from maybe previous years, and so it kicked to me, and so I got a ticket. So that was sweet. Anyway, um, that was a huge like apex, a summit of achievement for sure, the Western States, but it also like something died at that finish line. I realized that no matter how much I did, no matter how much I like sort of prepared for something like that, I just felt like there was kind of never enough, like there was it's sort of a never enough. And there's some history there in my family. My mother was a professional tennis player, and there's some sort of like there's some sort of story that I tell myself in my familial history around in my story around like sport, athletic kind of pursuit, and sort of like hunger for something that's like insatiable. And I think that was like somehow taking me away from larger questions I had about contribution, about I was having big conversations with myself about like capitalism and the economic models that were sort of eating the planet at the time. I got kind of involved at Occupy Wall Street in Portland as sort of a wannabe activist, and um, but there was all those questions stirring, and so those kind of competed with. I dated like an artist, an activist artist, who the two of us were like in our kind of courtship, we're having these big conversations about how to be in the world, how to be in right relationship with the world. And there was sort of like a dissonance there between like running 80 to 150-mile weeks. It was like a high mileage type culture then, of like the Anton Krupicka culture of just like running way too much. Um, and and I like lost 30 pounds. I was 135 pounds. I was just kind of, yeah, I was just kind of, running for blood. And that made me really sort of feeling single-minded and single-pointed in my pursuit of this athletic sort of achievement that felt sort of one-sided. And so there's a big distance there that sort of broke at the finish line. When I got to the finish line, in fact, like kind of the mytho-poetry of getting to the finish line, when I got to the track, I was like 18 hours and 50 minutes or something, pretty strong. But funneled onto the track with another runner, like got to the track right when I did. Like got through that little fence, and I reached out my hand to like, I was like, "Hey, bro, you want to finish this in hand in hand or just together? It's all good." and he just like looked at me with like blood in his eyes and just started like sprinting to the finish to like, and so we both had like a sprint finish after, the most harrowing day of my life on trail. And I think I might have like inched him out by a couple feet, but I remember in that moment just being like, wow, even at the finish line of this thing where we're like, we're not top 10, we're, 30th place or something, it doesn't matter. And yet this like competitive kind of animal came out, and I had sort of a bone to pick with that part of my psyche, and how that took me away from some sort of intimacy with the more than human world that brought me to the running in the first place. That brought me to, I met Joe Grant in 2007, who's a Black Diamond athlete and who sort of introduced me to ultra running, and our friendship sort of budded through getting lost in the Mountain Hood wilderness and like getting lost for hours around Mount St. Helens and traveling everywhere to run in the woods together as just as play, as kind of a way of play. And I kind of lost that a little bit. And so I think that part of the Western States was like it kind of awakened me to a level of sober. It was like a sobering moment for me in terms of the practice, my intentions with the practice. And I still raced a bunch after Western States, but something shifted. I did like the competitive bite, like I lost something, and what I gained was a larger concentric circle of inquiry and curiosity around how bodies move through landscapes. Like I said earlier, what is it that this practice of running that we do every day can do to set us up for a level of relationship and stewardship that with the places in which we live, that offers us an invitation to be in right relationship, in animate relationship, and in respectful, kind of humble relationship with place, as opposed to these landscapes are here for my playground. The landscape is a battleground for which I compete and fight to win for the podium. The landscape is a sort of it's a backdrop. It's a backdrop for my excellence. And I have a problem with that. And so I think the last 10 years I've been sort of wondering. I've been wondering about that and circling around those questions.
I mean, that struggle that you're sort of describing, I think, can be extrapolated out into a struggle of our general sort of running culture, or trail running culture. That I bring this up in a podcast many times. In if you bring it in a positive light, and I think there are two major sort of forces. You've got the classic, what I call coached cross-country runner who makes it into trail running, and it's all focused on nutrition and the bounciest shoe and the next PR and getting into the next race, right? There's sort of that trajectory. And then you've got the other side, those adventurers, those people that might be, if they would get older, they might just turn into hikers, or mountaineers who don't have can handle the risk factor in mountaineering, and so they turn into a little safer sport, which is trail running, right? And so you've got these folks who are out there who are just looking for adventure the most simplistic way, yearning for something bigger, wanting to make a contribution. And then you've got these people who are chasing sort of full-time athletic profession, if you will, right? And I don't want to pin them against each other or say that one is bad or one is good, right? Absolutely not. I think those are the two main forces in our sport, and perhaps the only bad side is that we, and sometimes in the media, focus too much on the record that's been broken at Western States rather than that personal journey that somebody made in discovering a beautiful place, right? And we need to sort of wrestle with that within our sport. And it's interesting now to bring it back to you, because you've sort of took this journey, did the corporate thing, very fast at Western States, could have, I don't know, perhaps trained a little harder and got some sponsorship gigs. I mean, it was a few years ago. I don't know if you would have fast forwarded this and this experience would have happened last year, you probably would find yourself in a different place with different opportunities, right? I mean, sure, you would have been able to get some hokas for free, right? But you chose to sort of go to a different path. And I think it's fascinating that this rages within you, this thing. And I think it can be sort of pushed out onto the larger sport. I mean, you were at the forefront. You've been reporting on this stuff over the last few months, especially, right?
Yeah, and I totally love what you just said, Bar, that the continuum of like the obsessed sort of all in athlete or musician or artist as opposed to the sort of the quote like respectful generalist that doesn't over index on anything. I think, my last couple pieces that I wrote and put together for Outside Run were with like Anton. I like checked in with Anton Kripicka and Adam Peterman here in Missoula. And, Anton was a huge inspiration for me when I was getting into running, as was for
For
as he was for
everyone. For
yeah, everyone. But
everyone.
like, that sort of obsessive, like way off the deep end, a couple 100-mile weeks, just like all in. And that, you know, and also talking to Adam, to be with him as he has had a kind of an injury year and is like ready to just really elevate his experience. I found him to be actually a really good example of someone who's both like very committed to his goals and also sort of relaxed. I mean, the takeaway that I got from my time with him, and I interviewed him while running for an hour. Like I had my recorder out the whole time and had to transcribe that interview with like wind and me panting, trying to keep up. It was pretty terrible. I should have just like published the audio file of that because it was hilarious. But he basically said like, how do I find a sort of eye in the storm?
Mhm.
That's my secret sauce. How do I train as everyone trains? Does the the strides and the workouts and does the 70 to 100-mile weeks, whatever. Sure, that's easy. Not easy, but that's like there's a formula. But then the X factor for him was that he's able to find when he's in competition or is in a tough workout, a level of like an eye in the storm of performance where he can like become calm and sort of like lower his nervous system, down so where he's able to perform at a level of calm. And I really resonate with that. And it's a larger style that I really appreciate about, and also am perennially inspired by my own work as a writer. I was watching this like interview, this documentary about Thelonious Monk like 2 nights ago. This like kind of scrappy about the sort of father of bebop and jazz, like jazz pianist, and he's like 100% in. He's all music. There's nothing else. I mean, there's nothing else going on in his life but like the piano. And that for me, I just we're drawn into those types of people. We're drawn into that type of commitment, that full send. um and I still so I'm that's a tension, that's a curiosity that I'm constantly grappling with, of a deep commitment to the work, to do excellent things in the world, while also I guess just constantly appraising like what that's contributing. I guess how is that, what is that what are the sort of trade-offs, I guess, personally or spiritually or creatively, and how might we both kind of pursue a life of, not to sound like a goddamn self-help guru or something, but like how do we pursue like excellence while also let's sort of an integrated self that is tending to the various sides of us, and that's the task. I think that's the task. And again, I find great sort of inspiration from the folks that are like just fully committing to a lane. And yeah.
No, absolutely. I think it's true because this also, in some respects, can be seen as making the world a better place, right? I mean, if you are really committing to something, as much as it might on the outside can appear selfish, I mean, you sort of being working on being the best self that you can be
Yeah.
makes your world, makes the hopefully it includes being better for to the people around you too, because you should be chasing that happy place in some respect, right?
Yep.
Well, it brings me then to you, because you are in your yearning for finding that happy place. You've decided to step out and step not just into something new, but in something open, something undefined, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You're like, that is accurate. Yeah, in the short term, I'm really excited to share that. Well, it's something that people in my community know and have been like bored to tears about me talking about. But I am working self-deprecation. There we go.
There we go.
The I'm working on a book project that's due. I think I might have probably spoken to it in our last conversation, but there's a nonfiction sort of literary travel memoir that I've been working on for the last several years that's being published next May, so about a year from now. It'll be coming out with Milkweed, which is a publisher out of Minneapolis who I admire greatly, who builds beautiful books and is really tending to this project and this story with care. And so I bring it up only to say this next month or two is really committed, or the next year will be committed to getting this book out in the world. But specifically, this next month is really biting down on getting the manuscript in its final form. So I'm sort of in the trenches, and I know that I was a few minutes late to this interview because I was working on a prologue that I can't seem to figure out. But nonetheless, that's some of the framework of my time right now. And then in May, I'm actually going to Portugal to chase an interesting story that's situated right in the smack dab in the middle, kind of in the east of the country, in what's called the Coa Valley, which is considered the Coa River basically runs runs north to the Douro River that then drains towards Porto, and it's a site of the most promising sort of rewilding project on the planet. It's called the Coa Valley Rewilding, and it's basically a bunch of environmental conservation groups in Europe pooled resources to purchase this sort of river, a portion of this river valley that had been abandoned, kind of previously agricultural lands. And what they're doing is they're reintroducing sort of apex predators, and they have like an Iberian wolf that's sort of like reintroduced there. They're even talking about trying to figure out sort of like habitat corridors to reintroduce the Iberian lynx, which is considered, if you like Google like the world's most endangered cat on Earth, the Iberian lynx is that. It's a beautiful small little cat. And anyway, I've been tracking the story of this quote rewilding sort of enterprise over the past several years. And what's cool about it is there's a 130-mile trail that basically follows the whole river from its headwaters to its mouth at the Douro. And so I'm going to walk sort of like not fast pack, but a ultralight walk run from the headwaters to the river and sleep in the dirt, and hopefully tell a story about the politics, economics, and sort of philosophy around what it means to rewild the space, like to like inject wildness back into a place that had sort of been revoked of its self-organizing wildness. So not sure exactly. It's complicated. It sounds romantic, but I think the business of rewilding is really interesting and sort of controversial. And I've been doing some research on what that sort of flavor of ecological restoration looks like in practice or in theory. And then I'll be on the ground next month, and we'll report back on it. Hopefully, I'm in conversation with a couple media outlets that are interested in telling the story. So hopefully it'll be a story sometime in the summer, fall that I can tell.
You mentioned too many things. I don't know where to connect to and where to start. So let's back it up. We need to talk about your book very briefly. Why a book? I used to run a bookstore. I love books. You don't have to explain to me. I love books. But you've published in many different forms. You've seen various different ways. You know the strategic realities in sort of getting a story out, entertaining an audience. What is it about the book? I mean, I feel like there's an obvious answer there, but I still want to ask the question.
It's a fair question to ask in this time.
I mean, it could be a Substack, right? Barf.
I know. I've been like texting everyone, be like, "Is Substack still cool?"
No, it's not. But sure, keep going.
I know, yeah, totally. Well, you answered it for me. Thank you. The book, man. Yeah, no, the book is a form that's always. I'm a book nerd. I have this dumb bookstagram thing that I do where I write. I'm like reading 200 books right now and writing 200 word like little micro synopses of them all. And I love the smell of books. I love the escapism in books. I've always been a book nerd, but for me, for actually walking up to the cliff of jumping into a book project of my own, I guess the answer to that would be um, the subject of the conceit of the book that I'm writing right now is about walking in circles. And I'll get to the answer in a second, but I got really captivated I got really disillusioned, and this goes back to the conversation earlier, but I got really disillusioned by vernacular language that I had been using, that the community of runners and mountain people had been using around peak bagging, summit fever, sort of like king of the mountain, conquistador of the high peaks, of like kind of collecting, accumulating places as sort of like a coin collector might, you know. And so in that sort of disillusionment or aversion to that language and my own kind of um, complicity in that kind of community, I began to track stories of people who would like walk around mountains as opposed to walk up them. They would like kind of kinesthetically leave the summit the fuck alone, and as a form of restraint, as a form of like spiritual restraint, to be like, I'm gonna court and pay reverence to a place by actually circuitously walking around it. And so I was like that, kind of fascinated by that motion, and spent the last basically 10 years of my life researching, traveling to sites of, and then in the end, customizing a few of my own custom circuitous walks um, as a form of walking myself into the questions that I'm asking about how to be in right relationship with landscape, connecting dots with the previous chapter of this conversation.
Mhm.
Um, and so I bring it. So the answer to your question about why not just a Substack, why not an article? Well, I've written a couple articles about this that we can find. Trail Runner has published them. They've been in various like blogs and online periodicals, um, and and my master's thesis at the University of Montana was sort of like centered on this kind of question. Um, and it felt like a larger devotional practice that required more breath and more connectivity between these stories. And therefore, as I said yes to a book project as opposed to a long form article or something, um, there's a narrative arc over the past 10, even 20 years that really required a larger canvas and a larger space to explore this journey. And I also think that for the reader, I want the actual act, the object of a book is to slow people down. The object of reading or listening is to slow the body down, slow the mind down. Actually, you know, activate the mind, but slowing the recipient of the story down in their place to be with this thing for a long enough time. And that's actually part of the story itself. Part of the reason for writing this is actually a conversation about slowing down the body in landscape to be able to attend to and be in humble attendance to place. And so I guess the book is sort of a little like microcosm of the sort of act or the invitation that's actually in the stories themselves in the book. So I don't know if that's a good answer to your question.
I mean, it is a good answer. Um, because what you're describing obviously requires a book form. It can't be a listicle, right? The 10 best circumnavigations barf, right? It could be, but there is that challenge that um that and this is sort of the challenge that I'm asking myself is when we embark on these out of the norm and out of the given proven in today's world financially successful models, how can we honor the the product, not the product, but sort of the intention that you're creating, um because it's intentionally different, it's intentionally special and unique. And I mean, I'm throwing this out as a challenge to me as somebody who's sort of has a podcast and has all these new media tools, right? I want to be able to capture what you're creating and not just say, hey, yeah, there's a new book, go to Amazon and buy it when it's available for pre-order, right? And we need to find a way of celebrating what you're trying to create. And you yourself have the same challenge then in a way too, right? You self-deprecatingly said before that people are sick about you talking about your book project, right? You need to find a way of sort of like, I don't know, I don't want to talk practical things. I don't want to say you need to do a book tour, right? But we need to find a way of celebrating this. Because not just because it's special and it deserves it, but there's also the financial realities is, I mean, you need that, right? It needs to be successful. You're not doing this as a passion project on the side for fun. You want to be able to live off of that.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe I'll push back on that a little bit. I think that to say yes to a book project is to say no to any illusion that one might make a living off of it or something. I have already like let that go as a possibility, you
I know
know.
you as the person getting into it. Yes, you need
Yeah,
to say,
yeah,
right. That's why I said this is a challenge to us as the community around it, right?
totally, totally,
How
totally.
can we lift that up? Because it is important work and it comes from a hard place. And so it should be compensated, right? It shouldn't
Yeah.
just be for exposure.
Right. Well, I mean, and you know better than most is, not to, unabashedly plug the um, Trail Running Film Festival, but that I have a lot of friends that are filmmakers, and so that medium is seemingly far more appreciated and received and heading in the right, like the kind of right direction, sort of in the financial sense or the supportive sense of, people want more video, they want less sort of text, um, they want their stories told visually. So yeah, I mean it's a good question. I don't know. As I kind of move toward the pub date for this book that I'm writing, I really do want to think about sort of unconventional ways of being in dialogue about the contents of the book that aren't simply like just go fucking buy the book.
Mhm.
I think between a book tour, between ways to actually get people in landscape together, um, I think also that I hope that there's something in this project that is far larger than um, far larger for the audience that they can receive and be in conversation with, that sort of helps to really orient their life in a time of great uncertainty. I think it's like I want this book to be really um, meet people at the intersection of like of where they are. I think it will. I think it does, and I'm excited to have that conversation with people. So I guess I'm kind of not answering your question other than to say I think that a book feels traditional. It feels old school. It feels obviously there's like a long tail, a long tradition, a canon of bookmaking. So the challenge then becomes how do you how do you offer something in that medium that meets the moment and that also meets an audience that's hungry for sort of alternative ways of experiencing the world, hungry for orientation in a very, I mean, I feel that way. I mean, there's that saying of like, write the book that, you want that's not out there that you want to read, and I've done that. This, like, this book is exactly the book that I wish somebody had written, and somebody has not written it. So I wrote it. And I think it helps me better orient myself in these times. And it's coming from a lens of kind of a strange, unique lens of like running and all these other things we talked about. So yeah, I guess the answer is like financially, it's sort of like already sort of in the red. But I think that it actually feels more prescient and sort of like relevant than ever in some ways. And so, I mean, in a year's time, what are the reading behaviors going to look like? I mean, I have great faith that the reading community is still going to be strong, and how this particular project is consumed by the reader or the listener, and also how do I bring the ideas that are sort of maybe more cerebral and abstract in the book? How do I bring it to real life on the ground, in person, which is sort of the aim of the book itself. So
I love all of that. And you brought up the film festival, and perhaps that's why I brought up this question and challenge, because the film festival is owned by Outdoor Arts and Recreation, a nonprofit that challenges itself, trying to look not just as um, film to be its only creative medium. And I think with the film festival for filmmakers, we have found the key on how to honor these stories and how to bring the community together. But internal, we have been asking these questions that we're sort of talking about right now, which is how do we celebrate other creatives, right? We did this poster design in order to bring a visual artist on board this year, right? And to serve us a need, we needed a poster design, right? But also to sort of bring a different level of artistry to what we are doing. And so I'm fascinated by your project. And I mean, as I said from the onset, I love books. So I'm all in on that old school element and what that does for our society and how it should be valued. So I think this needs to be sort of an open question of what can we do with it? What can we do in bringing community together around something that is something different. That's not just a film, right? That can center people, rally people, challenge people, inspire people. So that's super exciting.
Yeah.
So the project's already in the red, so we can work on that. As soon as you have links and everything, you need to share that with us so we can link it up so people can pre-order and all of this. So let's talk then about your trip to Portugal. Is this like the assignment? Is this what brings the bacon home, or is this another one of those passion projects that's already in the red?
I think there might be some bacon at some point, but I'm not hoping for it to serve that purpose entirely. It's definitely a story that has been. I mean, I was part of a reading the other night in town here in Missoula, Montana, and I read a piece that I'd written a couple. It taken me like 2 years to write, basically. And somebody in the audience afterwards asked, like, "What's your writing process?" And I said, like, something like, uh, "I've been increasingly interested in like slowing down the pace of these. Like, the longer a piece takes, the more interested I become in it." And so, and I say that with an asterisk because that comes from a place of deep privilege, and to be able to take time to write. I mean, at outside, of course, like, we had to churn and burn a lot of pieces, like, and so there were pieces that I wrote that took like 2 days or a week or a couple weeks to write, and that's required in some instances for sure. This piece, this piece is going to be, I don't know exactly where it's going to land and when, but I think that it's going to be an important conversation starter for me that might evolve into something larger. Could be a book, could be a Substack. I don't know. I mean, it's a larger conversation about, um, this word gets thrown around a lot, and it makes me a little bit nauseous to say it out loud. But like, not nauseous because it just keeps it's with me. But like wildness. What does that even mean to us? What is the like? What is the sort of what is the self-organizing principles that define a sort of definition of wildness, and why is it nauseating to the modern person to like not really feel as though they have much of an idea of what that feels like or is in their bodies and in the world. It's sort of an abstract concept in some ways for most people, and so part of this kind of project is to sort of close that gap and kind of actually re-engage with us with a term that in my line of work and in my training as an environmental writer at the University of Montana, wilderness, wildness, wild, gets brought up. You hear it everywhere and over again, in the canon. And so, as we sort of dip deeper and deeper, as you know, into like a further automated AI sort of inflected, uh, increasingly urbanized, increasingly sort of alienated from sort of less modified space. What is that? Is that a virtue? Is that a condition of being an animal in this world that is worth protecting or worth identifying or worth redefining? In what ways might we like recapture that lost part of us? Those sorts of questions
Mhm.
feel a little cliche to me, and they're also really central to the work and the questions that I'm asking. And so figuring out new ways into that conversation. And I think this particular place, for some whatever reason, I'm not sure, I'll report back, is sort of inviting me, whispering into my ear to be like, come here. There's a breadcrumb here for you that you need to find. And that's sort of the Easter egg in this place.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I guess the answer is I don't know what's going to come of it. But I'm excited to. It's something's there to sort of not find, but to be in conversation with.
I'm super curious what you do find because for me as a European, I always hold the juxtapositions of our two continents sort of together, and I treasure the tension. And Europe doesn't have any wild places anymore, and so it's sort of easy to come over here from the US and look and scoff at any um, attempt at recreating something like that. But the reality is, these efforts need to start somewhere. You can't just say, well, since we don't have it, let's just pave it all and turn it into a parking lot, right? I mean, there are efforts. I just read a really interesting article a week ago where a journalist was reflecting about the first reporting of the bees all dying. I don't know if you caught that article, but he was being part of that first wave of journalists that reported that bees are going to be dying and we are going to be sitting in front of an environmental collapse. And he told two stories. One of them is he's actually saying, actually, the bees didn't die. We have found ways of keeping bees alive because capitalism is actually very good at solving problems. And if we meaning Californians who are planting almond trees, need bees to pollinate, then in order to make money, they will find ways of getting bees and they won't just say, oops, all the bees are dead. I guess we are done, right? So capitalism is actually a good thing in order of solving a problem. And the other thing that they were saying is he was sort of admitting to is that this hype of like, oh my gosh, all the bees are going to be dying was overhyped. He sort of misreported sort of the realities of what was going to happen, right?
Mhm.
And I've been fascinated with this article because I think we've been over the last few years, and we talked about this before we started hit record, right? This combination of climate change and Trump and COVID sort of put us into this trajectory of utter doom and gloom. And I think in many ways, our feelings around all of these efforts are valid, right? But we also good at finding solutions. I mean, that's what kept us on this planet for thousands of years. We as humans, we're able to adapt, right? I mean, if we're not just sitting around saying, "Oh, I guess it's over," right? And so to come with these stories, discovering the stories of sort of rewilding places, is actually an interesting starting point of reclaiming the trajectory, if you will, right?
Yeah, it's so I was just talking to a colleague recently about one of my primary writing mentors. His name's William Du Bois. He's a writer, Prize finalist writer out of northern New Mexico. And one of his latest books, not his latest, but one of his most recent, was called The Last Unicorn. And it's related to what you said because the whole book is charting the story um, of protecting one of this like a highly endangered species, like an ungulate, this like kind of rare species, in Southeast Asia, so sort of like in Laos and I think in Vietnam, Laos, and they call it it's the I think the sula is the name of the animal, but it actually like kind of looks like a unicorn if you're looking at it from the side, as it's like one like seemingly like one like long horn. Anyway, the whole story is interesting because it's not just about like an endangered species, but it's like this particular animal is destined for extinction. Like there's actually like the numbers basically kind of confirm that it's on. There's no way, just like
Mhm.
the viability is it's over, over due to sort of over poaching and et cetera, and fragmented landscapes. but so the whole story is actually just profiling the humans, the human community, and sort of the politics for sure, but the human community of people who are still like committing to like saving like what's left of a dignified existence of the remaining numbers in this of these Sula. I think they're called Sula. Forgive me if I'm getting that wrong. Um, and so I found that fascinating, where it's like something that is destined to die, you know. And I think I mean that like actually quite literally. Like I'm not saying that like with the despair. I think just like the numbers are such. And so that to me is more a conversation of like the human heart in some ways, you know. Not to say that it's a human story, but that it's actually kind of centering something really interesting about hope, about endurance, and about like being in relationship with the world in a certain context in a certain way, despite the outcome. And I know Rebecca Solnit talks about that a lot. I love the sort of casting of like we do it anyway. You know, we do the work anyway, despite the odds, despite the realities on the ground. That's not sort of why we show up to do this sort of work, you know, for a sort of like some utopian destination necessarily. Um, and I think that's a sort of frame that I'm approaching this particular story with, is that, yeah, I mean, Europe, it's an interesting sort of tweak on quote wilding, because it's such a fragmented landscape. It's been sort of used and extracted for millennia, and and yet there's this sort of like crew that's trying to sort of uh, be in conversation with what it means to reanimate a place, um, like surrounded by development, surrounded
Mhm.
by human pressure. Um, what's that mean? You know, what's that mean? What's that mean to the people who are a part of that? What's that doing to them to decenter the human in the story? I'm like really excited about that. I'm excited about that. And I think to your point, the last thing I'll say is I have like over the years been really despairing. I found myself, just to be totally radically honest, like being really critical about ways forward, and feeling kind of like high horsey about that, being like, oh, I'm quite critical, you know, sort of like postmodern about the whole thing, and and actually not having much to say about like solutions oriented, and or not anything like really constructive or intellectual about it. And so I think part of my shift is actually wanting to recenter my focus and gaze and attention on the parts of the human heart that are still beating, and that are beating not for human survivability, but for a larger concentric circle of flourishing that includes humans in the dialogue with and conversation with, and the work of building something beautiful, not just for human excellence, but for a more than human tapestry of which we are a part.
Oh, that's really good. That's really, really good. I hate to bring it to the next question, because that next question is so crude. Um, so what's going to bring home the bacon? That's my next question. I feel bad asking it, but um, I am so deeply, especially as somebody who's been trying to build businesses myself, trying to be self-employed. I'm so believe that sustainability is financial sustainability, right? There is an aspect where we sort of need some basic needs met. And with you sort of like jumping off the deep end, and diving into projects that you are saying are not meant to generate cash, where's the cash going to come from? What are the realities look like for you?
I'm going to start a Substack. So
i'm
if
i'm
I do,
subscriber number one,
if I end up
begrudgingly.
starting a Substack, the whole podcast is going to be just like evidence of me not being sincere with my words. So we'll see what happens there. No, I'm just joking. Um, I think that um, I have no, yeah, I'm under no illusion that I can just like keep chasing stories like this and just feel that all of a sudden my mortgage is paid for. So I'm in this little rain shadow of being able to think creatively about projects without having to worry about money in the very, very short term, just because of whatever savings. But I do have a great calling and longing to uh, be more engaged with students and participants on the ground. So there's a couple avenues I'm really exploring and starting to kind of be a squeaky wheel with around environmental writing, the craft of and teaching more. Like I said earlier, I think before we started recording, I was invited to a class at the University of Montana to talk about the publishing industry, and just what kind of walked out of there feeling so alive and feeling. I mean, if you rifled through my journals, you'd find like, you know, uh, teaching facilitation, stewarding conversations about the intersection of the creative process and environmental work, and that sounds right in the crosshairs of what I want to do more of. So I think I'll be guiding. This is not related to writing, but I'll also be guiding some with Aspire this summer. I've been talking with Abram, the founder of Aspire Mountain Running Adventures. I helped him sort of develop the Mountain Rainier Wonderland Trail program, and I'm not sure exactly where I'll be this summer, but I think I'll be in Yosemite helping with a project, and then there's an outfitter here in Missoula called the Free Flow Institute, which is basically an organization that offers creative writing workshop courses, multi-day workshops, while paired with whitewater rafting trips or with putting people on public lands. So like literally, putting people in wild space to work on creative writing projects. It's a really cool organization. In fact, next spring, they're offering this amazing program that just lit me up with Rebecca Solnit, one of my favorite writers, Craig Childs, someone who really introduced me to the sort of first person experiential environmental writing, like way back in the day with his book, The Animal Dialogues. And Brendan Leonard, a dear friend of mine. And then Len Nessifer, I think is how you say his last name. And they're all four of them are guiding a trip down the Grand Canyon next spring through the Free Flow Institute. So it's like this epic confluence of people who I admire, writers, thinkers, activists, scientists, all asking these questions. So taking clients into unmodified places to re-engage with their creative process, to find ways of expression that bring them closer to landscape, that bring them closer to themselves. That's a place that I get just fired up. I don't know what that's going to look like in the next 5 years, but I have like some very grandiose plans of like being one of the, like being a leading voice, not a leading voice, but I want to be part of that conversation at the highest level, I guess. So I don't know what that's going to look like on the ground, but that's the vision. That's the direction.
Well, I love this. I mean, you are already a leading voice in that regard, right? You just, a crude joke, you just have to start your Substack. No, you have to find, no, I think, absolutely. I think now that you're sort of, yeah, there's sort of an unfolding of your wings that you can do. And what an incredible privilege. And I mean this in a positive way. We so often use the word privilege in a negative way indeed these days, right? But that you have a little bit of runway, that you have that breathing room to be able to sort of work on this creative project and discover sort of your flow in the way you want to operate, and you don't immediately have to adjust yourself to someone else's schedule and someone else's demands and stuff. So that's an incredible place to be in. And I mean, yeah, I'm just super excited to see how this all unfolds and what's next. And I hope that we can follow your journey and support you as you're sort of taking these steps.
Thanks, Matthias. That means the world to me. I'm also, it really does. I'm trying also to offer. I've actually put out a little call for editorial assistance, sort of freelance mercenary editorial support for anybody's projects. This isn't some shameless plug. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I mainly just want to work with people writing stories that matter. And I've already had several people reach out with book projects, with really amazing writers who I'm humbled they even think of me. So that's also something that I'm doing in the interim to basically sort of patch up some of the financial sort of gap that's happening here, um, which is just fun. I'm just a nerd for that. I mean, the three-legged stool of the writing life, I guess, for me has been writing, like writing a shit ton of, the 10,000 hours kind of thing, like just doing the work. 98% of which is terrible and you'll never read it. Um, and then there's the reading part, which is like just reading is the secret bullet to writing better, is just read a ton, read a book a week kind of thing if you can. And then the third leg is really, I mean, sorry, this whole stool is actually, the third leg I'll just say is editorial. So like editing, if you can figure out a way, either building a writing group for you, or yeah, I mean, in my case, I was able to find a job that helped me learn the hard skills of editorial. But that actually is not only a cool skill to have in the professional world, but actually it's really helped me write better, because I'm on the flip side of someone else's process. I'm listening to your deepest wishes, your unconscious sort of attitudes toward a draft, and I'm able to listen to that really deeply. And therefore, when I go back to my drafts, I am listening deeper. I'm actually able to kind of remove myself and kind of look at it sort of as an editor sometimes. And so that three-legged stool of the writing life for me feels really strong, and that I'm sort of building all three of those right now. And I was just going to say that stool rests on the most important thing, which is something that I keep on harping to myself and to other people, is like, the most important thing is that the primary thing is the experience itself, the direct experience, the quality of attention and direct presence that one can have in the thing that you're wishing to write about, to cast on the page, or in your case, the Trail Running Film Festival, in the film. The film isn't the thing. The writing is sort of almost a bonus in some ways. It's the direct experience that you're having that is primary. I mean, I think Gary Snyder said something like that, the poet that I admire. He said, like, the experience, the full-bodied, full-hearted, full-minded experience that you're having in place or whatever you're doing is the most important thing. And then if you're able to write a poem about it, like, that's awesome too.
Mm-hmm.
And that too is that it requires presence, and it requires a direct experience with the synthesizing or poetics of it. But the primary experience of being fully here and fully now is the thing. Like, that's it. And then everything else is sort of is gravy. So I'm just like honored to have a process like writing, that has helped me become a little more in intimate touch with others, with where I live, and I guess like with myself.
I love it. Let's get people some links that they can connect with you, where they can connect with you, follow you, watch out for the book pre-order link to drop and everything.
Let's do it. Yeah, that's
What you
great.
got? What you got for us? Where should we link people to?
Yeah, the links will be. I don't know exactly when the pre-order will be. That's going to be a while from now, because the book isn't coming out until May of 25, probably spring of 25. So as soon as anyone stumbles upon this podcast, we will have updated links for that. Thanks for offering that. And then the place that's probably central for finding any work of mine is at my website, which is just nicolastriolo.net. Who uses .net anymore? Does anyone use it anymore? Is that old school?
No, it's very old school. It makes
Is
it
it so
awesome.
old that is it like so bad that it's good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you
But
for
I
that.
mean, I'm also an old guy, right? So, I mean, you don't ask my teenagers. They're like, what
Really.
website?
Yeah,
Can you
totally.
like hook me up on Snapchat? Hook me up. Even that sounded old already.
That did sound old. That sounded old. .net, man. Jesus, that's terrible. NicholasTriolo.net. I am fairly active on Instagram, trying to sort of be more intentional and discerning about how I use that platform. And then, yeah, there's a lot of bylines, a lot of work that is on outside. If you're looking for running specific content, and then a couple like articles and essays that I'm really proud of. One of which is the one I read last week here in Missoula, called "Agony and Endurance," and that's actually on the Dark Mountain Project. And then a few other pieces. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Dirtbag Diaries audio, which is a fun short that we'll link to there.
Mhm.
And yeah, I guess the website would be the place to send folks.
You see, you're so old school. I love when people have websites. I hate, you see, we joke about the Substack thing, but the Substack is one step up about the I just have an Instagram presence. You don't need a Substack because you've got a website. That's the key. Seriously, own your content, right? Very old school. Don't
That's
just
it.
rely on social media companies um to feed you let the algorithm share your stuff around.
Yeah, that's
Very
it.
cool.
That's a like, how do we get away from the algorithm, dishing us what they want us to, create our own, like I'm excited about creating our own tastes that are
Mhm.
like ours. And that's hard. That's increasingly hard to do these days. And
It
so,
is. I mean, it's heartbreaking as somebody who's been on the internet at the very early days when being on the internet allowed one to discover and curate and cultivate their own tastes when perhaps living in a small town didn't allow them to, right? Where they were sort of stuck and their friends didn't speak their language. And so you found it online, right? You typed into Alta Vista or whatever, right? And you curated your bookmarks. And so the internet became this place of sort of, yeah, curating your own taste and discovering what you loved. And then social media came around and sort of the people that were our people, they weren't like some evil people from outside our realm. They built these tools. I was one of the first on Twitter.
mm,
So I have to blame myself for this in some respects, but it destroyed all of this because now we're being fed up. My teenagers, they don't know how to search online for their content. They just expect this stuff to be algorithmically fed to them because of their previous presences, right? And so,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there's something lost. We need to get
Uh,
back to that.
yeah. How do we like really be in touch with and attuned with what we want and like, or what we like, what are creatures and our, what are our bones like? I know that sounds kind of hokey, but like, what is it that we actually really like? And if there is a sort of mediated algorithm, just noticing that, just being aware of that. I mean, I'm saying that to myself. I'm not prescribing that to anybody. I'm on Spotify all the time. I'm obsessively listening to podcasts that are fed to me by the bots, and you know, being conduited through the algorithms of Instagram, and hating myself for being on as long as I am, and also understanding that to have an authentic taste and discernment, or aesthetic discernment of what I like, what works for me as style. That's like that's a task these days. That's a task,
Yeah.
and a noble task, and a noble task.
Well, and the problem is that these algorithms and what a sidebar here at the end of this no, but these algorithms, they don't have the best intentions, right? They're trying to feed you more ads. Like it is important, especially um as people, to always look beyond the sort of the rim of our plate, as we would say in German, right? The idea of sort of discovering new things. We might not know what we like if we at a too young age just put ourselves in a little box and said, this is me and these are my 3 likes, then we're missing on a whole bunch of new experiences. So it is important to do both, know what we love and discover new things, and now have that open space for it. But it can't come from an algorithm that's feeding us shit, right?
Yeah, totally. No, that's a great place to end on. That balance is crucial. Yeah.
Perfect. Nick, thank you so much for the conversation. Thanks for being back on Singletrack. Can't wait to follow you along. I sort of wanted to have you on early because I sensed and knew that you were still in this space of discovering. I didn't want too many things to be in place yet, because then I would have to have you back on next time when the book's actually announced.
I was just so excited that you reached out. It's like such a pleasure to just wrap out with you in a casual format that feels really welcome. And I am hoping to see you on the road this summer. We should do that. Let's just do that. Yeah.
I like it. I like
Yeah.
it. Let's make a plan.
Yeah.
You're gonna be in Chamonix this summer? Oh yeah, you're not with Outside anymore. They would have flown you over there.
I
Ah,
know, I know. Yeah, that's the trail running in heaven over there, the afterlife.
the afterlife. Oh, the Nirvana. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick, for the great conversation and for coming back on Singletrack. All the best to you. over the next coming years as you're writing and projecting and figuring the next steps out. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us today. To learn more about Nick Triolo, visit his website at nicolastriolo.net and find him on Instagram. All the links are in the show notes at singletrack.fm. This was Singletrack, and I see you over at Electric Cable Car for daily news of the trail and mountain world. I'm your host, Matthias Eichler, saying Auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss.